So many of you may have read Atul Gawande's Being Mortal, or Paul Kathani's When Breath Becomes Air. And these two books, which were both New York Times bestsellers, they were authored by physicians, but they have engaged citizens and other clinicians and caregivers across the United States in thinking about what it means to live with a life-threatening illness and about death, which are both often taboo subjects in our culture. Through these personal stories, these authors inspired us to think about our mortality, what matters most in life, and why personal preferences are often neglected in healthcare decisions. In the past decade, the healthcare system began to undergo a shift from care geared primarily toward medical or clinical needs to care that addresses the needs of the person as a whole. And that's part of what we're going to be talking about together today. This person-centered care integrates the preferences of the individual and their families, and it responds to functional, social, cultural, emotional, and spiritual needs, as well as the medical needs. And it's the hallmark of palliative care. It's the way palliative care is organized. This pivot to a different kind of care is absolutely critical given the increasing number of Americans who face advanced or serious illness and the growing cultural diversity of those we are treating. Advanced illness often results in the impairment of daily activities, reduced mental or physical capacities, frequent medical treatments or visits, and a higher risk of death, all which can cause an overall decline in health and quality of life. Our presenters today are going to help us explore various aspects of serious illness and end-of-life care, which will illustrate how considering the whole person can improve the patient's quality of life through better patient engagement and health care that meets the goals of care of each patient and their families, the ones that they identify as important. So given that, Sarah's going to introduce our first speaker, and we will begin.
Well, come on up here, Casey. It's my distinct pleasure to introduce my colleague and friend, Dr. Casey Shillam. Casey is the Dean of School of Nursing at the University of Portland. She was the founding director of Western Washington University's RN-BSN program and very instrumental in the launch of the Palliative Care Institute. Casey serves on the Health Policy Advisory Council for the American Association of Colleges of Nursing in Washington, D.C., and was selected for their Nursing Leadership for Academic Nursing program, and was also a Robert Wood Johnson Foundation Executive Nurse Fellow. Her opening session will set the stage for the conference by providing an overview of important aspects of palliative care outside of the traditional medical approaches of care. Particular focus is placed on differentiating between religiosity and spirituality and the importance of supporting spiritual and cultural preferences in palliative care. Help me to welcome Casey.
Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
Welcome to the opening launch session for this year's Palliative Care Institute conference. I am so honored and humbled to be here this year, and I think that one of the things that I have found most rewarding in my career as a nurse has been the momentum and the passion and the movement that has taken place in this community around this issue, and really looking nationally at the impact this community and the work we're doing here is having on the national stage. So I just wanted to put that in the context of the work that I do in health policy, in framing that every community taking this initiative to improve palliative and end-of-life care at the local level is what changes things on the national landscape. So congratulations to all of you for continuing with your dedication to this work and for being here to support one another, whether you've been to these Institute conferences before or with the overwhelming number of people where this is your first time. Reach out and talk to one another about how this works in your community, how this works in your neighborhood, and what does this look like in your everyday life. So I am going to help us set the stage for what we're here to do today, and that is to look beyond the traditional biopsychosocial model of what we do in healthcare as providers and how patients, families, and communities interact with the healthcare system. So the objectives are in your conference materials. I just wanted to frame our work here together today, making sure that we're looking at differentiating what we've done traditionally with the biopsychosocial model and how we've been really hesitant to talk about this role of spirituality in the work that we do as clinicians in everyday life, and even more of a lack of that, a focus on spirituality in palliative and end-of-life care. So it's almost this interesting space and place where we've become so conditioned as clinicians to not want to be vulnerable ourselves, to not want to engage in a place and space where we might come into conflict with our own beliefs and feelings. We need to feel like we are controlling the situation because we want to be confident for our patients, for our families, for those who are taken care of. And yet not addressing this issue of spirituality really leaves that partnership at a loss for being able to effectively provide care to the people who need it in the way that they want it. So that is the ultimate goal here, is how do we truly create partnership with one another, with patients, with families, with the care team. That means we have to be vulnerable, that we have to move beyond what we learned in our clinical environments. So the biopsychosocial model really helped us to advance beyond just the biological, right? So we've got the pathophysiology and we've got the characteristics of what's happening with age and gender and genetics, and we can measure those things and we can identify them and we can be comfortable in saying, I'm pretty sure given this set of symptoms and this diagnosis and your genetic history, this is what we can predict will happen. And that helps us feel safe. But in the last 20 years, there was really a push from patients and families and from other clinicians saying, we can't predict everything. And so this evolution of the psychological and the sociological. Let me start this over. Good morning, everyone. Good morning. Welcome to the opening launch session for this year's Palliative Care Institute conference. I am so honored and humbled to be here this year, and I think that one of the things that I have found most rewarding in my career as a nurse has been the momentum and the passion and the movement that has taken place in this community around this issue, and really looking nationally at the impact this community and the work we're doing here is having on the national stage. So I just wanted to put that in the context of the work that I do in health policy, in framing that every community taking this initiative to improve palliative and end-of-life care at the local level is what changes things on the national landscape. So congratulations to all of you for continuing with your dedication to this work and for being here to support one another, whether you've been to these institute conferences before or with the overwhelming number of people where this is your first time. Reach out and talk to one another about how this works in your community, how this works in your neighborhood, and what does this look like in your everyday life. So I am going to help us set the stage for what we're here to do today, and that is to look beyond the traditional biopsychosocial model of what we do in healthcare as providers and how patients, families, and communities interact with the healthcare system. So the objectives are in your conference materials. I just wanted to frame our work here together today, making sure that we're looking at differentiating what we've done traditionally with the biopsychosocial model and how we've been really hesitant to talk about this role of spirituality in the work that we do as clinicians in everyday life, and even more of a lack of that, a focus on spirituality in palliative and end-of-life care. So it's almost this interesting space and place where we've become so conditioned as clinicians to not want to be vulnerable ourselves, to not want to engage in a place and space where we might come into conflict with our own beliefs and feelings. We need to feel like we are controlling the situation because we want to be confident for our patients, for our families, for those who are taken care of. And yet not addressing this issue of spirituality really leaves that partnership at a loss for being able to effectively provide care to the people who need it in the way that they want it. So that is the ultimate goal here, is how do we truly create partnership with one another, with patients, with families, with the care team. That means we have to be vulnerable, that we have to move beyond what we learned in our clinical environments. So the biopsychosocial model really helped us to advance beyond just the biological, right? So we've got the pathophysiology, and we've got the characteristics of what's happening with age and gender and genetics, and we can measure those things, and we can identify them, and we can be comfortable in saying, I'm pretty sure given this set of symptoms and this diagnosis and your genetic history, this is what we can predict will happen. And that helps us feel safe. But in the last 20 years, there was really a push from patients and families and from other clinicians saying, we can't predict everything. And so this evolution of the psychological and the sociological helped to inform how we are moving beyond just the biological as healthcare providers. And this did help us with thinking about, okay, psychological, we can look at emotional state, we can look at behaviors, we can look at beliefs, and that informs what we do as providers. Then looking at sociological, finally looking at socioeconomic status. What is the access points to care? What does that look like in what interpersonal relationships might mean for the patients and families and communities for whom we're providing care? And this felt like it was enough for a long time. We're like, oh, we are finally listening to patients and families. Look, it's right here on our model. We can predict that I can look at psychological, I can look at emotional, I can look at socioeconomics, I can still predict. And I can still feel safe as a clinician being in relationship with patients. But that doesn't work because we haven't focused fully on what that spiritual component means. And without that focus of looking at the spiritual aspect of relationship with, we do not have the ability to truly partner with. So this focus on that spiritual dimension has been very uncomfortable for clinicians, for providers of care, even for people who may not be licensed providers. Think about those who are giving care in long-term care facilities, those who are hospice volunteers, thinking about how do we create that barrier so that we don't become emotionally overloaded means that we just can't go there. It's not safe. I can't predict, so I don't know what will happen. And yet that has led to a terrible place in which we ourselves don't understand the body, mind, soul, and spirit connection and that responsibility that we have to have that connection in order to fully be present and partners. So in order for that to happen, I'm going to argue today that I'd love for us to get ourselves in a frame of mind where we really turn inward and look at who we are. And you're going to be challenged with this throughout all of the speakers that you hear today. Challenging who we are and how we see ourselves in our spiritual context, in developing cultural humility. Again, these are things that we have to understand where we are because we cannot be competent. We cannot know everything. We cannot be predictive in how we engage with patients, families, and communities and one another. We have to look at where do we stand, how do we feel, so that we are comfortable with engaging in working with people who have differing social, economic, spiritual, philosophical perspectives than what we do. So I am going to have us start right now. So if you would please take out, if you have a pen and some paper, you can jot down a couple of notes. If you want to just sit and kind of meditate for a moment and think about what your response is to this, I'd like for you to consider for yourself, when you see the word spirituality, what does this term mean to you? So is anybody willing to share out some of the ideas and thoughts that you have about what does spirituality mean to you? Yes, I have a hand right up over here. Yes, ma'am.
Spirituality means connection to my highest calling in love and fullness.
Beautiful.
Could you repeat it?
Yes, the calling to my highest love
And fullness.
and fullness. Duncan, yes.
For me, means being open, loving, kind, and compassionate. especially for those who I initially, I'm not sure if I connect with, how do I find a way to be with them?
So
Not
being-
me, but for them.
So being open, compassionate, loving with others. That is Duncan's mental model, his picture that he has in his mind of what it means when he looks at the word spirituality. Yes?
Beliefs, myths, and rituals.
Beliefs, myths, and rituals. Fantastic. Yes?
For me, spirituality is an ongoing practice. It's integrated into our very being. And it is rooted in personal transformation that transcends intellectual constructs and ideologies.
So a continuous process, not something that you get to. It's not an end goal, and it's not tasks that you do, but it's a process of transcendence. So throughout all of those descriptions that people offered, and thank you so much for sharing that, that can be a vulnerable thing to do in a group, right? Even to identify how to put words to your definition of what spirituality is, that is an act of vulnerability. And that is what I'm going to ask for all of you to consider doing today. Whether you share with each other or whether you really are insightful about challenging your own assumptions, being vulnerable is the key to all of this working for everyone. But through all of those words that you've described, here's a common definition that I like to work from. Patricia Reed is a nurse scientist who helped really think about that spiritual practice in nursing. And she talks about it as a process, not a destination. That we think about the word spirit from its Latin derivative is that for breath. And so thinking, how do we breathe in? How do we transcend? Thinking also about elevating from our daily existence. So giving us that space where we can be mindful of what does it mean to be present, to transcend, to think beyond just where we are in this moment. And all of these things are ever present. So whether you're acknowledging that you are acting from a perspective of being spiritual or not, it is still present in who you are and how you make decisions. And so if you couple your role as a clinician or a family caregiver or somebody who is providing support for another person in whatever capacity that looks like, you have to be mindful of how your perspectives about how you show up interact and intersect with that other person. And so being able to do that helps us to move beyond that biopsychosocial model into this perspective of truly holistic care in understanding that spiritual aspect, and that it is this cornerstone to help us with the mind-body-spirit, the mind-body disconnect that we used to think happened in medicine, we know does not happen. We know that they are integrally connected with one another. And that in order to be present, we have to acknowledge the peace, the strength, and the fact that all decisions are made with that in mind. So another component of some of those spiritual dimensions that we can look at are the spirit dimensions that were mentioned in some of the descriptions that were offered. Love and hope and feeling connected, trust, inspiration, those are all the components that might be filling somebody from that spiritual perspective. And being open for understanding how that impacts their care is where we can make a difference. All of these things provide meaning in everyday life, but when we have somebody who is facing a serious illness and someone who is facing end of life, these become even more impactful and important in that person's decision, in that person's journey, and in how we show up with that person. So recognizing that this is uncomfortable for clinicians and providers in everyday life is enough of a hurdle to overcome, but now We're talking about palliative care and end-of-life care, and it becomes exponentially important for us to be able to be with from a place that acknowledges and honors the spiritual perspective. So I find it fascinating and interesting every time I ask for people to turn in and think about what does spirituality mean to you, how few people mention or bring forth religion. And it isn't that they are separate and not connected concepts, but they are very different concepts. And I believe from both my research and my practice and being with students and teaching and being in all of these different realms of who I am as an academic nurse and a care provider in palliative care, the fear of believing that religion and spirituality are one and the same, I think creates a false barrier. And when we can be clear about where we are in our spiritual practices and beliefs, we are then much more able to understand that religion is a way of enacting spirituality. But it is not being spiritual, that they are not one and the same. And so thinking about how do we tease apart these kind of different concepts, which they really are, you can see that the descriptors for spirituality reflect some of the things that we've already talked about here. It's a way of life. It is a way of fulfilling meaning. It's a way of thinking about what fills your spirit, what gives you hope, what gives you drive, what brings you joy. And that might be through religious practices, which are a structured way for people to have a common understanding of how they can practice their spirituality. But spirituality may be digging your hands into the dirt and pulling out weeds. It might be walking in a forest. It might be sitting with somebody you love and having coffee. That can reflect spirituality. Understanding that we have to be able to support the people that we are caring for in their spirituality is really where I'm challenging us today. When we can identify we have a specific religious practice that informs how we see the world and how we see the care that we provide, helps us to create that space where we know, okay, this is where my belief system is, but now I can be open to what my patient is telling me. I can be open to what this person I'm taking care of is telling me, and I can value where they're coming from, even if I don't believe it, even if I don't hold that same value. I know my values, I know my beliefs, I know what fills my spiritual soul, and I know how important that is to me. That helps us with being able to see the other. And that is a practice that we have to do and improve and really develop skill in so many different areas. Whether we're talking about our assumptions of what it means to care for a sick child, what it means to take care of somebody from a different culture or a different background or a different religious perspective than what we have. All of it is understanding where do we lie with our beliefs and our definitions, understanding how important they are to us, so that we can then understand how important it is to the person from whom we are caring. So incorporating spiritual care into our practice is really hard. Again, it comes back to that space of being vulnerable, where you can walk into a relationship experience with a patient and you think, okay, I know the diagnosis, I see their social history, I see all the resources that they have available for them, I'm going to go in and I'm going to give a plan. Because that's what I do. I'm good at giving plans. And you go in and you have this encounter that really falls short. Because that plan doesn't fit in at all with that person's spiritual perspective. Because you don't even know what it is. Because going in and having a plan is safe, and you can still feel like you know what you're doing and you're going to come out on the other side feeling good about yourself, because that's what it's about. No, it is not. Again, it's not about you. It's about you coming into partnership with and being vulnerable. So being able to pick up on those cues about what brings you joy. What is important to you right now? And not defaulting to what we think we are saying is spiritual care in, let me go get a chaplain for you. Hold on, I'll be right back. I did a spiritual assessment, they need a chaplain. Call in our chaplain. That's spiritual care. No, it is not. That's the safe default that we turn to when we say we've done spiritual care. But really opening up that space of vulnerability to ask and to truly listen and to hear and to know that you are not going to have the answer for that. And it's not your job to have the answer for that. Your job is to come alongside with what you do know about the biopsychosocial model that you practice in, but to bring that together with the spiritual aspect so that you can together come up with what that plan should be. So acknowledging that we have a true lack of space for this to happen. And we see this from the time of education. In 2004, there was a study done that looked at, okay, medicine, you're getting it. Physicians, you are getting this. You are getting educated in spirituality because it is in over 90% of the curricula in the United States. Check. Got that box checked off. But when we dug a little deeper to see what did that look like, it was typically a lecture or one assignment or one assigned reading, and not truly creating space to build skill, to truly evaluate, to assess, to understand how to do this. And I will give an example of what we are learning at the University of Portland School of Nursing. I am very grateful that my BSN program director from the University of Portland School of Nursing is here today, and I think this demonstrates how vulnerable and difficult this can be to acknowledge that we don't create space. And we have been challenged by our students to create space for how we talk about race, how we talk about whiteness in our care system, how we talk about cultural humility, how we really give that space to talk about these difficult concepts about power and privilege. And we don't do it well, and we have to change that. And I also argue that we have to change it not just from the perspective of culture, but about how we are uncomfortable with any topic. And this is one of the most uncomfortable topics for somebody who is a licensed care provider to delve into, because it isn't something that is prescriptive. It isn't something that we can know, and it isn't something that we can dictate. It is a place of true vulnerability. And so looking at what we're doing in our education system for providers is such an important point for everyone who is a clinician. So asking your partners in academia, what are you doing to actually create space for the next generation of our clinicians and providers coming into practice to be comfortable with this grapple? How do we grapple with this as a profession? How do we grapple with this as a care system? It starts in the education of our providers, and it then must continue into practice. So we have a few challenges underway, but I believe that we can do it because the first thing that we do at the University of Portland is we ask our students, what is spirituality to you? We do have the freedom, and I will put this out there because I think it can be a barrier when you think about being at a state institution versus a private institution. We are a private Catholic university. And I think that people feel sometimes, oh, well, that gives you the ability to do that. You can talk about spirituality because you're a Catholic school. Again, go back to that definition and that differentiation between religiosity and spirituality. We can talk about spirituality regardless of what setting we are in. But it's that fear and that default of, oh, no, we can't talk about that. We're a state institution. Can't happen here. Yes, it can. And it has to. So challenging yourself with what is spirituality to you, and then being clear about how you move forward with that. And then, you know, I am an academic, so I'm going to give you some tools, because that helps. And I'm going to talk a little bit about the FICA, the Spirit, and the HOPE tool. And I don't mean the FICA tax credit, and I don't mean the Spirit airline, and I don't mean the concept of coming together in hope. I mean acronyms that help us, because this helps with making it embedded into your practice, right? Until you become comfortable with asking questions, it helps to have an acronym that you can incorporate into your everyday world of being with people and being comfortable asking about spirituality. Because if you're not comfortable asking about it, because you're just now really reflecting on what an impact it has on your practice, you surely aren't going to open yourself up for that level of vulnerability in the moment when you're like, what's spirituality mean? What's important? Yeah, let's go back to your medication list, because I know that. So just a few tools that can help us with that frame of reference. The FICA model, looking at faiths and beliefs, what is important, who is in your community, and what can I help you address? And just so everybody knows, these slides are going to be available on the website as well, so I don't want you to worry about having to get every single one of these words down. You'll have this available for you. But thinking about how can you relate to one of these models and build that into your practice. So these are just a few different ones to think about using in your toolkit. And you may become comfortable with one and realize that one versus another is better in different situations. So the Spirit model, what is your spiritual belief system? Just asking that question can help with getting over that hurdle. What are some things about your personal spirituality that you think are important for me to know? How do you integrate that in a spiritual community? Again, that helps us get over that fear that we have of talking with somebody about religion, because we don't necessarily know all the religious practices and all of the religious beliefs of every single person, and neither do our chaplains. So that default of, oh, let me get a chaplain because that person can help, that isn't effective either. It's a matter of being able to ask that question, what are the ways in which you incorporate spirituality into your life? Realized practices and restrictions, implications for care, and then looking at terminal events planning. What happens whenever you're getting toward that end of life? And that's where those goal-directed conversations of care can happen and help us. And then this is a really great model that I love teaching this one to students because it's easy to remember. It's hope. They can remember hope. And it helps us with getting comfortable with asking those questions. What brings hope, meaning, comfort, and strength for you? What does the word hope mean? And just asking that question gets into the space for being able to have the conversation. Do you have an organized religion? If you do, what does that look like? If not, then what are your personal spiritual practices? And then thinking about the effects that can have on your care decisions that you make. So helping not just you be comfortable with asking this, but helping the partnership that you're creating move toward that person understanding the impact that their spiritual beliefs have on their care. And empowering them to understand they have the right to have that part of their care be developed. So as we go into today, and you listen to the amazing speakers who are coming up after me, you listen to the breakout sessions that are happening today, remember that above all else, we must listen, we must hear, and we must connect. And by opening up yourself to that vulnerability, I challenge you to think about what difference that will make in how you care for and with others. Thank you so much, and I look forward to spending this wonderful day with you all.